All right, so let's jump right in. Today we're tackling a really huge challenge in behavioral science, and it's this. How in the world do you get all the different researchers and scientists to speak the same language? We're going to focus on compulsive sexual behavior disorder, or CSBD, and look at a new proposal that's basically a blueprint for understanding and actually treating it effectively.
But first, just think about this for a second. What if we asked scientists everywhere to find a cure for a disease, but nobody could agree on what the word cured even means? One group says it's this, another says it's that. How could you ever make progress? Well, that's pretty much the exact problem we're diving into today.
You know, it's kind of like trying to find the fastest person on Earth. But imagine one country measures the race in feet, another uses a meter that's a totally different length, and a third team just sort of eyeballs it. You'd have tons of data, right? But none of it would mean anything. You'd have no idea who actually won. That kind of chaos, that's what's been happening in the study of CSBD. And this really gets to the heart of the issue. You have all these dedicated researchers doing important work, but they're trying to measure things in a field that just doesn't have a common ruler. And this is what that chaos looks like in the real world. You've got study A over here, measuring success with one kind of questionnaire. Then you have study B over there, and they're focused on something completely different, like how often a person does something. They're using different tools, different timelines, different definitions. It's a mess. The result? You can't compare the findings from study A to study B, and the entire field just gets stuck. So, okay, how do you fix a problem like that? Well, this new proposal says you have to start at the very, very beginning. Before you can measure if a treatment is working, everybody has to agree on who actually has the disorder in the first place. The very first step is for everyone to adopt one single, clear definition. This one, from the World Health Organization's ICD-11, is the proposed standard. And notice the key words here. It's not about the behavior itself. It's about the failure to control it and the real distress or impairment it causes in someone's life. This gives everyone a common starting line. And to apply that definition properly, you need a solid three-step process. First, you start with those official ICD-11 criteria. But, and this is a big but, you can't just hand someone a piece of paper. You need an experienced clinician to actually talk to them, to conduct an interview. Why? Because things like shame and denial can totally skew the answers on a simple questionnaire. And finally, that clinician's job is to carefully separate CSBD from other things it might look like. And this quote right here is just so important. It really gets to the heart of that distinction. Just feeling guilty or having a moral conflict about your sex life is not the same thing as having compulsive sexual behavior disorder. A trained clinician can tell the difference, and that's exactly why those expert interviews are absolutely non-negotiable for getting the diagnosis right. Okay, so once we have a clear diagnosis, the next logical question is, what do you actually measure to see if a treatment is helping? The proposal boils it all down to two key things. To really get the whole story, the argument is that you have to measure two different but equally important things. The first is symptom severity. Think of this as the internal experience. How much pain is this causing? How is it messing with your job, your life, your relationships? The second is behavioral engagement. This is the external side of things. How much time and energy are you actually spending on the behavior? If you only measure one without the other, you're only getting half the picture. And when we talk about behavioral engagement, we have to break it down even further. It's not just one thing. We need to know the frequency. How often is this happening? We need to know the duration. Are we talking about a few minutes? Or are we talking about binge behavior that can go on for hours? And finally, there's preoccupation. How much mental real estate is this taking up, even when you're not doing anything? How consuming is it? But of course, the impact of a disorder like CSBD, it doesn't just stop with the core symptoms, does it? It ripples out. It touches every single part of a person's life. And that's why it's so important for researchers to also track these secondary impacts. What's happening with the person's overall mental health? How are their family and relationships holding up? Are there financial problems, trouble at work? All of this stuff gives us a much more complete, real-world view of whether a treatment is actually working. Now, this is where things get really fascinating, looking down the road. So far, everything we've talked about relies on what people say and what clinicians observe. But what if we could objectively measure change right in the brain itself? Researchers are already exploring things like neuroimaging, looking at activity in the prefrontal cortex and the brain's reward system. We're not quite there yet, for sure, but it is an incredibly promising new frontier. And the last piece of the puzzle is when you should be measuring all this stuff. A single check-in right after treatment ends, well, that's not enough. It doesn't tell you if the changes will last. So, the recommendation is to measure at the start, right after treatment, and then follow up again in 3 to 6 months, and even a full year later. This is so critical because some changes, like rebuilding trust in a marriage, they just take time. Long-term follow-up is the only way to know if a treatment really sticks.
So when you put all of these pieces together, what you get is a clear, standardized playbook that any scientist anywhere in the world can use when they're studying this disorder.
This new standard basically creates a simple 4-step playbook. 1. Standardize your diagnosis. 2. Use those 2 core metrics we talked about. 3. Be really transparent about who drops out of your study. That's super important. And 4. Always, always, always monitor for potential side effects. Just imagine if every single researcher followed this same playbook. The whole field could take a massive leap forward.
And that really leaves us with one last big thought to chew on. This whole thing is a blueprint for one specific disorder, right? But what if this model, this idea of agreeing on the definition, on what to measure, on the whole process, what if it were applied to the study of all behavioral addictions? It really makes you wonder. What incredible breakthroughs are just waiting to be discovered if we can just get all our best minds speaking the same language?